Members of council, this meeting is now resumed. Before the recess, council was considering item GM 23.8. Before we return to that item, I would take the release of member holds. Councillor Ajamari.
Thank you. Would staff please put it up on the screen? NY 26.2, which is here without recommendation. We do this on behalf of Councillor Robinson. These are the motions that this is the report that staff had proposed.
So this is on page 3, NY 26.2. Which is 1 Heathcote Avenue. Councillor Ajamari is moving the staff supplementary report. Okay? Recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please. Councillor Layton, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 28 in favor.
Okay. Now, Councillor Grimes. Councillor Grimes, this is the chair of Etobicoke Council. Would you like to, on page 3, EY 23.73, 2522, and 2542 Keel Street, and EY 25.40, if you can defer those two items on behalf of Councillor DeGiorgio?
I would love to defer both those items, Madam Speaker.
Okay, thank you. So we'll vote on it separately. On page 3, EY 23.73, motion to defer, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Davis. Deputy Mayor Minimong, when you're seated, please.
Councillor Holliday, please. Councillor Fillion, please. Councillor Fillion, please.
Councillor Fillion, please.
The deferral carries unanimously, 29 in favor.
Okay, on page 3, EY 25.40, which is 2522, 2542 Keel Street, being deferred. Recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Thompson, please.
The deferral carries unanimously, 31 in favor.
Councillor Fletcher?
Yes, I've had a chance over our supper break to have a great conversation with Ms. Romoff and Mr. Robbins about AX 30.7, financial impacts resulting from high water lake levels, and understand all of the inspection work that's underway this year, all along the waterfront from the Rouge to Marie Curtis Park, and I'd like to release that, please.
Okay, on EX 30.7, Councillor Fletcher is...
Very sorry. I do have a question or two of staff. I'll go do it. My apologies. I wasn't aware you were going to release it.
All right. I have reviewed a number of urgent motions to be added to the agenda. Who's first? Councillor Davis.
Which, oh, yes. So this is the motion that I was going to move on the report that had to do with reserve funds, and it has to do with the city school board surplus property acquisition policy, and the fact that that reserve is now emptied, and there was supposed to be a report back on it in 2016. And this is a motion that asked them to do it as requested in 2016, a report.
On favor? Carried. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. A motion to introduce as it pertains to watching the hockey finals in the Olympics. As folks will remember, 4 years ago, we moved a similar motion. Nobody caught it this year, so I got to do it again.
Okay, on favor? Carried. Councillor Wong Tam. Councillor Layton, do you want to move Councillor Wong Tam's?
Thank you. On behalf of Councillor Wong Tam, this is in relation to city-initiated zoning amendment for the village of Yorkville.
On favor? Carried. Is that it? Okay, so we're going to go back to item G, M 23.8. If we can put the, I think that we were still asking questions to Councillor Holland. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Through you to Councillor Holland. Diversity is our strength in the City of Toronto.
Absolutely.
What you're attempting to do is, with your motion, you're moving, so I would term it a small step to create incremental changes.
Absolutely.
Right. And your motion does not preclude or does not disqualify any companies dealing or doing business with the city, whether or not they have that diversity component or that gender component. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And so it is your intent and hope that the staff will put a clause in the procurement agreement which really specify and get companies to start thinking about diversity, and clearly with respect to gender diversity, clearly we want other forms of diversity in a diverse city with the motto, diversity is our strength?
Absolutely.
Are you trying to do anything else, impede people doing business with the city as part of this procurement process?
I wish, but that did not pass at committee and was not recommended by staff, so exactly what is before you is just exactly what you're saying.
Right, so this is a bit of a flag, red or otherwise, that you wish to utilize to get us to realize that as we talk about diversity, we have to live up to that, and we have to put in place the opportunity where we start to see this reflected change in our procurement, so there's opportunities created for others?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just said whatever flag.
Councillor Davis to speak. Councillor Davis, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Speaker. I have a motion that has some amendments, and I've had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Patchalock and Councillor Holland, and I think, having listened to some of the questions during the question period, I guess that's what we would call it, I think this will satisfy a number of concerns. So I think Councillor Carroll pointed out in her questions, as did others, that what we're attempting to do, what Councillor Holland is attempting to do, is to essentially begin to monitor what is happening in the corporate sector and whether or not women's participation on boards is improving, and whether or not the companies that we do business with are in fact also improving in terms of their representation on boards. And as the report points out, only 12% of the corporations now have women directors, and that improvement is very slow. We have seen over the years a commitment to it, but not so much have we seen the results to achieve those outcomes. So this report says, and this amendment, what it does, it eliminates work with and support the provincial committee. It says monitor it, because we want to learn from what the province is doing. And secondly, it asks to look at collecting the data on gender composition of boards as part of the whole procurement transformation project. So it doesn't mean we would have to go out and set up separate databases or do some kind of work that would add any particularly onerous work onto our procurement staff. It will be part of the transformation that we are about to undertake. There's an RFP that is going to scope the changes that we're looking for in our procurement process, and this could be part of that. And I think that probably addresses some of the concerns that staff expressed in their report. Now, they did say in their scan of jurisdictions around the world that there was only one country that has a procurement policy that not only requires that corporations have gender balance on their boards, but it also asks them how they are actively striving to achieve it. And what we're doing is nothing close to that. What this recommendation does, that Councillor Holland tabled, is simply say, let's collect the data and let's understand what the corporate world looks like in Toronto in terms of the businesses that we do business with. So that's what this is about, and I'm quite happy to support with those amendments the recommendations that are before us.
Thank you. Councillor Shan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I had two concerns with this motion. One was the concern around work with and support a particular process in the provincial government, which we don't have a lot of clarity on. So I understand the motion to kind of modify that, Councillor Davis' motion, so I'll be supporting that. The other part is it doesn't go enough to explicitly mention the intersectionality that needs to be considered within gender diversity, but I'm hearing that there might be a motion coming forward. What I have to say is that I'm more than convinced, if I wasn't convinced earlier enough by some of the questions that were being asked, I'm more than convinced that this is something that we need to do as a council. When this came to Government Management Committee, I heard from the staff this is too much to do at this point of time, which was somewhat not satisfactory for me, but I understood the practical difficulties. But we cannot come back after 5 years and say the same thing. So we have to do something in between now and maybe 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, concrete steps that will make it easy for us to come up with a stronger position down the road. So if we don't communicate what we want, even if we don't use that as a criteria, as a statement, we need to be explicit and communicate this to all of our vendors so that they can get clarity that this might be coming down the pipeline. And it is very important for us to give the advance notice that gender diversity is taken seriously by this council when we do business with businesses. So that statement itself, even though it doesn't currently impede or influence the current procurement possibilities, but it will actually shape what comes up 5 years down the road. And when we have this discussion, maybe 3 years, 5 years down the road, we would have given that notice to many of the businesses. Second thing is, if you don't commit to measuring, if you don't commit to looking at data, we are not going to be able to find solutions to this. So when the staff told us at the Government Management Committee meeting that some of these things are nuanced and difficult and so on, this motion itself is asking for some steps to kind of clarify that when we come back, we don't have the same level of confusedness or a kind of the helplessness around implementing this. So I think this is a step in the right direction. In fact, this is actually creating the necessary steps that should have been taken many years ago. And when hearing some comments about almost tempted to kind of use the word, some of them are alluding to almost like reverse sexism type of argument, makes it very much the reason why we should be proceeding with this and set it into the process, set it into the institutional process that we can actually go forward towards moving for gender equity and gender parity. In fact, more than gender parity, I think we need to use gender equity, because I think if more women are in boards and more than men, it is a good thing to have, because patriarchy and misogyny and systems of oppression are operating everywhere. It's always better to have more women in businesses than more women in businesses, and shouldn't be looked at as a problem. Thank you.
To Wong Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to just move a motion. My motion is largely asking staff to put an intersectional analysis over the work that they're going to do around gender diversity. And of course, this is all about making sure that we don't look at just diversity from one particular perspective, but that all women, all 52% of the population, come from very different places. We're different by race, we're different by ethnicity, we're different by ability and sexual orientation and sexual gender expression and so forth. So this gets us to the widest range of analysis when it comes to taking a look at gender. And this is not anything revolutionary, folks, and it's actually happening all around the world in far more robust and ambitious ways than we are proceeding today. I want to thank Councillor Holland for taking this particular initiative. I do recognize that based on the comments the questions by some of our colleagues, that they have some concerns about whether or not this is going to disadvantage other people. And it's always very interesting to me when I hear about the concerns around equity and the implementations and the tools to implement equity, they oftentimes are seen as a burden to those who are already in positions of privilege and power. And I think we need to be honest about that, is that if we are going to build a more just and more inclusive and more respectful society, then we are going to have to do this work. And this work is really about setting values and being very clear about what type of corporation people are to build, how they need to reflect the diversity of the workforce, as well as diversity of the clients that they're trying to serve. It generally makes good business sense, which is why we see Fortune 500 companies all rushing to embrace diversity and doing far more in some cases than the City of Toronto. And there are some sectors that we see women that are very much disadvantaged and underrepresented. And that's why we have the science, technology, and engineering and math that comes about when we talk about STEM. And how do we actually increase women's participation and leadership in those sectors where they have been oftentimes underrepresented. Today there was some conversation about whether or not the TDSB would eliminate streaming. That is just one form of discrimination based on gender, based on race, based on class assumptions. So there we are, another institution trying to undo what they have always done and made assumptions that that was the way to go about it. So I actually think this is actually a very good thing, and the work needs to be done if we actually want to build that city that's far more inclusive. When 52% of the population is no longer underrepresented in positions of political leadership, boardrooms as well as classrooms, and in every other field, then we will worry about this thing called reverse racism or reverse sexism, whatever that can be. But at this point in time, while women are so grossly underrepresented, especially in boardrooms, especially in positions of leadership, then I think we need to do everything we can to level the playing field and to adopt and embrace equity as we see fit. Otherwise, we should not be talking about diversity, our strength. We should actually just be doing nothing. And doing nothing, I don't believe, in this city is an option. So thank you very much, Councillor, for your leadership. Councillor Holland.
Okay. Councillor Holyday, we're going to wrap this up.
I will, Speaker, and I'll be pretty quick. I just wanted to make the comment to my colleagues that they should pay very close attention to this and use extreme caution. I appreciate the arguments leveled by my colleagues at Council, but I would like to take the view that we have a report in front of us from the supply chain folks who have urged us not to do this. And they've laid out a bunch of reasons. And the motions before us really are kind of a circular way to implement a policy that they've told us not to do. You know, if you understand anything about privacy law and requirements, when you go and collect personal information, you have to have a reason that you collect it. And I don't know what we'll tell the corporations as to why we're collecting it. We are either developing a policy and not saying it about how we feel the composition of their board should be, or we're not. And if we're not, then why are we collecting this information? There's a lot of caution in doing that. I also worry about, you know, any experience anyone's had on a panel where you've interviewed candidates and there's those questions there about a diversity background, and when you see someone that's declined to answer those, you kind of wonder why or you know, what has happened. Well, what's going to happen when a vendor declines to answer that question? Are they going to be disqualified? Maybe they feel that they don't want to give that statement because it's personal information. I don't know. I think we're just heading down a road which is contrary to the advice we were given by our experts on this. They talk about how important the social procurement policy is and how important the work stay focused on that. I'm satisfied to take their advice in this matter, and I would urge you to think very carefully about what it is that we're approving today and how that works in context with what they've just told us.
Okay, let's put the motions on the screen. I only have the one motion. Okay. So motion, it's on the screen. Amendment by Councillor Davis. All in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please, your vote. Councillor Perruzza.
I'm it.
Oh, I'm it.
We're not allowed to turn it off.
The motion carries 33-3.
Amendment by Councillor Wong Tam. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor Davis.
The amendment carries 29-7.
Item as amended, recorded vote. Oh, Councillor Holliday's motion. Councillor Holland, yes. Councillor Holland's motion, sorry, recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor McMahon. Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Councillor Ford, please.
Councillor Wong-Tam.
The motion is amended, carries 30-6.
That's the item.
Okay, that's the item. All right, so, well, hold on. Hold on, Councillor Wong-Tam,
I have a point of privilege, Madam Speaker.
point of privilege?
I'd like to share with members of council that we have some good news coming out of Ottawa today, that Bill C-210, which is the making our national anthem gender inclusive, has just passed. The words "Thy Son's command" will now become "of all of us command." So I hope that, Madam Speaker, that the next time we rise for the national anthem, that we will also be able to reflect the national anthem as gender inclusive. Thank you very much.
Councillor Fletcher?
Oh, I was just going to release that water one now that Councillor Perks has had a chance to speak with.
Good.
Okay, just a sec.
That would be page 4, EX 30.7.
Okay, EX 30.7, Councillor Fletcher is releasing.
Yes.
On favor? Carried. All right. So, we'll now go to page 4, EX 30.4, the hotel and short-term rental tax. Councillor Karygiannis, you held the item down. Do we have questions for staff? Is that questions for staff, the names I see up there? Councillor Fletcher? I see. Okay. Councillor Pasternak, your name is up there for what? Okay. Questions to staff. Councillor Pasternak?
What happened to Councillor Fletcher?
No, she released an item. She released an item. Councillor Pasternak, question?
All right. I thought I had another minute or two. Through you to staff, just for clarity's sake, the various hotels and short-term rental places are supposed to collect the tax, and are they remitting it back to the City of Toronto, or are they remitting it back to Tourism Toronto? Who collects it?
Through the chair, the hotels collect the tax and remit it to the city or through the city's agent. And the city is responsible to make payments to Tourism Toronto.
Oh, okay. So does the first 18 million go to Tourism Toronto, or is it on a pro rata basis, or how is this?
The city's contribution to Tourism Toronto is the subject of a provincial regulation. The amount is established based on a floor amount, based on what was collected and contributed to Tourism Toronto in 2017. But in 2018, it would be prorated based on the period of time in which the tax is in effect.
So what if the tax revenue collected is only 18 million or sinks below that? Who gets first crack at the funds?
Sure. Through the chair, under the regulation, Tourism Toronto is paid first, essentially.
So they would collect the first 18 million, and then over and above that, the City of Toronto would?
Yes.
Now, based on our shelter strategy, I think it might be safe to say that the City of Toronto is probably the biggest buyer of hotel rooms in the city, unless it's a major convention. How would it work in that regard? Would the city be paying its own tax with the risk that those funds would not revert back to the city, that they would have to fill the first 18 million of Tourism Toronto first, or would we be exempt from paying it? How would that work?
Sure. Through the chair, under the proposed tax system, we would not collect tax on shelter arrangements. Those would be exempt.
So the block buying of hotel rooms would be exempt from the City of Toronto. So in order to get this taxing power, we had to agree that Tourism Toronto would be left with, would be properly funded. Was that kind of part of the deal with the province?
Well, I wouldn't call it a deal or an agreement. When the legislation was proclaimed, it came with this regulation requiring this arrangement.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, questions?
Yes, a quick question, and I'm going to flip because I think Councillor Pasternak was asking questions about the HOT portion and collections. Just wanted to ask, on the short-term rental side, about how we'll be collecting there, because throughout the debate, because it's sort of it's almost like using the word Kleenex when we're talking about tissues. This whole short-term rental debate took place, and we always talked about Airbnb. And they came and made a deputation and said, yes, we will collect this tax. But what about the others? I have an apartment building that's got Canada Stays listing up in Parkway Forest. I don't know much about them. Homestays, VRBO, the rest of them. Have we had discussions with them? Do we know how we'll be collecting from them?
Yes, Councillor, through the chair. Under the proposed tax, the obligation to collect and remit the tax is with the host, so the property owner, the principal residence owner. However, most, if not all, make arrangements through internet platforms.
Right.
Airbnb being the predominant player in that space, and they have indicated they would sign an agreement with the city to collect and remit to us. So, and we expect other players in that space to follow their lead.
To follow their lead, because they're the predominant player. But if time passes and the others are not remitting and not being followed up on, isn't there a migration of hosts to another platform so they don't have to pay the 4%?
Well, the way the market is likely to operate, I think there's probably an incentive to affiliate with an operator who will collect and remit the tax. But again, the obligation is on the host. So if they are not making arrangements to collect and remit, then they're offside our bylaw.
So anytime we introduce a new tax or a fee like this, we have reporting back. Is there already an agreement that you'll be endeavoring to really, now that you know you can collect a tax, to really know as much as you possibly can the short-term rental market, so that when we get a review back of this policy, we'll know to the best of your ability whether or not you're successful in remitting, or will we just simply get a report that says Expedia gave us some money, VRBO gave us some money? How will we go out of our way to find out if they're accountable in any way?
Certainly we'll monitor that situation, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davis, questions?
Thank you, Speaker. I wanted to ask some questions about the kind of information we've been able to review to date about how the GTHA has actually administered their existing program. Do we know about their collections? Do we know about their refunds? Do we know about errors? Do we know about data, how they secure their data? Are these the kinds of things that we've had a chance to look at yet?
Through you, Madam Speaker, at present, Councillor, we do not have a relationship with Greater Toronto Hotel Association. We have engaged them in discussions to provide a service on a fee basis, and we have requested certain information from the Greater Toronto Hotel Association as to their effectiveness in collection, their auditing protocols and frequencies, and how they measure compliance. So we have an understanding of how they operate.
So my understanding is you have seen financial statements. Do you think that it would be useful to do further review of all of their operational policies and practices, at least to identify whether there are any other conditions that we might want to put into a collection agreement? Do you think that that would be a useful thing to do?
Again, through you, Madam Speaker, yes, we would want to understand how they do business.
Okay.
The terms of their collection on behalf of the City of Toronto, however, will be dictated by our contract with them. So what they have, how they have administered themselves in the past is less relevant than what we will build into our contract as what they will be required to do in future.
But there would be no harm in finding out more about their current practices and how well they've delivered their current program.
Yes, obviously, we
Okay.
look to them because
Thank
of
you.
their experience.
Thank you. The second part, this is now going to be a program where they will get $20 million of our tax money, and currently we have no voice and no involvement in Tourism Toronto any longer. Do you think it might be reasonable to have a report back on how we could, what governance changes might be necessary to ensure that we are having an effective voice to represent the city's interests? And maybe that's a governance question I should ask Mr. Fragg.
Certainly, I think it's entirely appropriate to review the governance structure to the extent that we are the taxing authority, and there may be a requirement that we have some form of representation on the board.
And would you support a motion that says before you extend this option or extend this contract, an optional renewal, that you would report back to us so that we know how well this has gone? Would you support a motion like that? Or do you think it would be useful?
Through the chair, just to clarify, the proposed contract with the GTHA is a 2-year term with an option to extend.
Right.
If the question is, should we be reporting back before exercising the option?
Yes.
Yes, I would be very supportive of that.
Okay. Finally, I don't really understand the costings here. And when I look at the kind of functions the city will continue to have, we have enforcement, we have refunds, we are going to be doing further audits, we are going to have to administer any prosecutions. There still is a lot of administration and compliance and enforcement functions that will rely in the city's domain. And I guess, could you provide us with a breakdown of those additional costs? Because in the analysis in the supplementary report, we don't get a very clear analysis of what the actual costs are that will remain with the city.
That was your last question.
Through you, Madam Speaker, in fact, we have done detailed cost projections for the costs of the city providing this collection versus the cost of the GTHA providing this collection. So we can provide a breakdown between our salary costs, our other operational costs, our auditing costs. Yes.
No, that's it. Councillor Davis, that was your last question. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to our staff. Is it safe to say that the hotel business is fairly robust in Toronto? The business of hoteling, is it fairly robust? Okay.
Yes.
It is.
We've got a record RevPAR revenue per room in 17.
So we have statistics only from 2 years, 2015 and 16, and hotel nights were up 4.7%. Revenue is up over 15%. Is that a trend that's continued for?
The trend that continued in 17, yes.
Okay, continued in 17. The report doesn't make any mention of similar taxes in jurisdictions other than in Canada. Do we know what similar, state or city taxes are in places like Chicago and New York and Los Angeles?
Well, every place has a different regime of different layered taxes. I think in New York, the total tax burden is now around 20%, but Finance may have done some review. I haven't. We did ours about 3 years ago. I don't know if Finance has more recent information.
No, that's a fair assessment.
And so, do we know of the $1.2 billion in revenues? Do we know? Can the Hotel Association tell us what percentage of that is business travel?
They could make they don't know it from their collection, but they do surveys to understand what the makeup of the various aspects of tourism is. So they probably could do an estimate, but I don't have that with me.
Well, I mean, could you take a guess? Is it probably 75% in major in hotels in Toronto?
I don't think it's that high.
Not that high. Okay, those are my questions, Madam Speaker. Oh, one more question. Sorry, one more question. The application of the tax, is it inclusive of HST or exclusive of HST? In other words, just on the room rate.
The tax, through the Speaker, the tax would be assessed at 4%, and HST would act on top of that.
Okay, so a $200 room, the 4% cost will be $8.
Correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Karygiannis to speak. You held the item down.
I was looking to release the motion. I'm moving staff amendments. My questions have been answered.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell to speak.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I have a motion, and really it's just to bump up the rate a bit. So 4% is this unfortunately this is anecdotal evidence, but my assumption is that most of the occupancy, or a lot of the occupancy, is business travel. The 4% rate on a $200 a night hotel room is all of $8. Boosting it to $6% increases it by $4 to $12. So my motion proposes that we increase the rate from 4% to 6%. And this is not an uncommon rate from my understanding of cities and other jurisdictions south of the border. I don't think it's necessary to compare us to Mississauga, because people will opt for Toronto for other reasons. And yes, Councillor Ainsley, I am on the Budget Committee. I've sat through many, deputations and a lot of consternation about what to put in the budget and what to put out of the budget. And the one thing that I know is that City Council is very grateful for the land transfer tax that was brought in a couple of regimes ago. If it wasn't for that, $800 million windfall that we're realizing now, it's gone so high I've forgotten about it. I don't know where this city would be in terms of tax avoidance or what have you. So, although I'm typically, my concern at City Council is always with putting City Council on a sound footing. And I like to say, I don't have any trouble spending money, I just don't want to spend any more money. But I think if we don't look at raising the rate now to 6%, we'll be looking at raising it in subsequent years. So why not get out of the gate with that rate? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. We do have a couple questions for you. Councillor Holyday, clarification of the motion.
Councillor Campbell, any thought about how much more money this will bring in?
Yes, this will bring in. This will bring in an extra, I believe it's about, it has the potential to bring in an extra $14 million.
14 million, that's net. So what will you do with all this money?
No, that's not clarification of the motion. Madam Speaker, that's not clarification.
I need to know, what shall we do with the money?
Well, I mean...
No, Councillor Holiday, that's not clarification.
Fair enough.
Come on, like, it's getting late.
Shelters.
Okay. Councillor Karagianis, clarification of the motion.
To Councillor Campbell, you said that this is not unusual and in other cities they have. Would you be able to provide an example of one or two cities that have it at 6%?
Well, so I know, having stayed in New York a couple of times in the last year, that they have. I was surprised to see that they have many layers of taxation, which include a city tax.
Does that mean New York has 6%?
Or higher.
So you're not sure?
I am unsure.
Okay, so...
But that's not clarification of the motion.
You say
is there some confusion in going from 4% to 6%?
You sold it to us, Councillor, as other cities having that. So my question is, what other cities? Are you aware of other cities or you're not?
I asked the question of staff and they didn't have
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Carroll, clarification of the motion.
I do need clarification. I'm wondering, is that changing the number, is that to do with your conversations with staff, with market research, or
that's not clarification.
simply would like to have a higher dollar number come into our budget?
That's the latter.
Are you concerned, having read the report, that a certain amount of conversation did go on in the sector with economic development staff, not just revenue staff?
So that's not
clarification
of the motion, but no, I'm not concerned, Councillor Carroll, and I did read the report.
So I will finish. Are you concerned about the comments in the report that you read then, about the comments about compliance?
I'm not concerned about compliance.
Compliance. In both sectors, what we learned from staff, in committee, I can't remember how deeply this is in writing, but what we learned from staff, both in committee and somewhat in writing, is that part of the consideration for staff when they're developing proposal and bringing it to us for new fees is to make sure that you are striking the right notes, so you have equity between sectors, and you have set the rate at such a point that rather than take us to court and go nuts for 3 years, they'll comply. Are you concerned about compliance at this 11th hour changing that number?
I'm not concerned about compliance.
Thank you. Those are my questions.
Councillor Pasternak to speak. Councillor Pasternak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I need a couple more minutes. I think they're still working on my motions.
Okay. Councillor Davis to speak. Councillor Davis to speak.
I think they're ready.
Oh, boy.
Could you start my time?
No,
Over again.
I didn't put your time on. Oh,
I was by the clerk.
okay, Councillor Davis, do you want to speak? Go ahead.
Oh, I see.
Okay. Councillor Pasternak, do you want to go or does? Okay. Wow. Councillor Pasternak to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, so I have two motions, and we discussed this at length in Executive Committee, and it is a peculiar situation in which we are required under an agreement under the law to revert a portion of a tax, more than half. This Tourism Toronto is going to take more than us under 2018 revenue streams, where we're obligated to give the first $18 million to an organization on a government-collected tax. And I realized that was the price, I guess, we pay for getting this power to administer this tax. But it is disconcerting. And we did raise the issue of governance. We did raise the issue of accountability. So I have two motions. One is to look at the Tourism Toronto and their governance structure, and that if we're going to be reverting these kinds of monies to a third party, we should have a say in how they're operating. And secondly, although the scenario is unlikely, we have to protect ourselves against the situation in which the tax revenue itself falls below $18 million, and then we are in a net loss position on a municipally collected tax. I'm also concerned that we're giving a subsidy to multinational hotel organizations through Tourism Toronto, and in fact, organizations that are charging $300 to $500 per night per room should be paying their own freight when it comes to marketing, when it comes to building their base, and certainly they have the money through international parent companies to pay that. And this is basically turning into corporate welfare. But that being said, it was part of the agreement. This is a good tool to have as far as a revenue tool. It's disconcerting that we're losing hotel rooms, but we're gaining short-term rentals, so that's not quite an offset, but that market variance is certainly there. So I would ask that you support the motions to protect the City of Toronto, to give us a say in how these funds are being spent, and to make sure that this tax is as fair as possible.
Councillor Davis to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. I also had motions that are similar, or the last one to Councillor Pasternak's, but they're probably compatible. So the first motion asks our CFO to undertake a further review of the Greater Toronto Hotel Association's current program, what their experience has been, what are their business practices, their collection experience, their arrears, their data security, and other operational practices prior to entering into an agreement, not to report back, simply to identify are there any other provisions that ought to be in that agreement we have with them to ensure that we reduce our risks, increase accountability, and protect the public interest. The second is to ask our staff to report back to the Executive Committee prior to exercising the option to extend the contract. It is a 2-year contract, so that we can have a better understanding of how well this has worked and whether or not this is the direction we want to continue with. Thirdly, this asks to review and report with recommendations for governance changes to ensure the City's interests are represented and the financial contributions are utilized effectively at Tourism Toronto. When I first read the initial report, I was quite surprised by the recommendations, frankly. I could not imagine that we would be collecting a brand new tax, an important tax that was going to collect millions of dollars for our city, and we were going to contract it out. And we're going to contract it out to an organization that has as its members the very people that we are taxing. And so while I think there is an inherent conflict of interest in this particular collection methodology for the hotels, I recognize that based on the staff recommendations, they would be in a better position to actually implement the hotel tax quicker. They have the data, and based on the recommendations or the information in the supplementary report, they would do it at a lower cost. I still am not convinced that this is the model we should be using. I believe that this is a public function, and we have public accountabilities, and we should be protecting the public interests. But I will be supporting it because I know which way it's going to go, and I think it's just important that we are going to build in as many protections as we can. I could be completely wrong, and I can see the mayor laughing at my speech because I know what is going to happen here. I suspect that as a result of this, we will find some issues from an implementation perspective, and I hope that when the staff report back at the end of this, we will have a better understanding of the actual costs. If you read the report, there are many functions that still remain at the city as city responsibility. We are going to be responsible for making sure that the there is compliance and enforcement. We are going to be responsible for refunds. We will be responsible for still a number of administrative functions. And these costs that we've estimated so far are pretty significant in terms of our remaining administrative functions. So I will support it. And finally, though, I do absolutely agree that if we are now going to be giving Tourism Toronto $20 million, that we should have a say about how the money is spent, what programs they are undertaking on our city's behalf, and we should have a voice at the table as well. So that's the purpose of recommendation 3. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I normally look to Councillor Campbell for his wisdom and his leadership. He's a big believer in consultation, research, gathering of all the facts, and I've listened for 3 years. I've listened to him bristle when councillors come up with motions based on a belief and nothing more. I'm going to put my faith in the original John Campbell that I know and love, and I will actually go with the 4%. I will not be supporting his motion.
Councillor Carroll to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will not be supporting Councillor Campbell's motion either. Madam Speaker, I am pleased, however, to hear that Councillor Campbell was looking at a cash register tape from New York City, and I'm hoping that the next time we get the chance to have a conversation between ourselves and the province about a municipal sales tax, it might go differently. I'm sure that he'll be talking to his friends. That's where you want to go, adding a point here and there and going all in. This is not an all-in tax. It's actually low in the rating. It's always going to earn us less than $50 million. But I had to rise to speak, Madam Speaker, even though I think Councillor Burnside covered why we really ought to stick with the staff recommendation that they developed with the help of a study from KPMG of what would be a rate that would keep the dynamic tension between short-term rental and hotel, would in fact bring in compliance some of those platforms that we don't know as well as we know Airbnb, Expedia, and some of the other leaders. We've got to get them in. So you have to set a rate initially when you're starting a tax that is the best road to compliance. Because here's the thing, if you get that first tax rate wrong, and you don't get compliance, you don't have 36 million or 50 million, you've got bubkiss. You've got legal challenges, non-equity between sectors, and a rate so high that you get no money. No one complies. Everyone's doing an end run around a rate that you got wrong in the first place. So you won't have the 36 million. The only other thing that I want to speak to, Madam Speaker, because I hear my good friend Councillor Pasternak is concerned that we're giving money to Tourism Toronto. But Councillor Pasternak joined Council a considerable amount of time after that period of time where we had much more of a fiduciary responsibility and a role in Tourism Toronto. We don't want to run Tourism Toronto. We're happy to pay them. They managed to drag in, as we know from this very week, $9 billion in tourism. Our events and our partnership with them gave us the best tourism year we've ever had. That's why we like them running it. We can carry on the business of politics here. We've got advocates of this sector and that sector jumping on airplanes from time to time. Councillor Thompson's not here. Did he go to find more business? He's off to find business as soon as this council session is over, which hopefully will be tomorrow. That, coupled with our partnership with Tourism Toronto, brings in the big bucks, and that's why we're giving half of it to them. If we were to run it ourselves, the level at which they're working now, the amount of energy that they're putting into that operation is a ridiculous amount beyond what we used to do when we were shortchanging them and trying to run them in the sum of $2 million. That's not the way you run a business that brings in $9 billion worth of hotel and convention business. Better we should share this revenue with them and have them do that work for us. It is their core business. They're distracted by nothing else, and so you want them to have the resources to do it. But to this tax and any other tax we have the power to do. Councillor Burnside is right. That's the point at which we should get down to being extremely disciplined. Every time we ask staff to go away and introduce a new rate, we had the issue of land transfer tax, the personal vehicle tax that was there for a short amount of time, and now billboard tax, same thing, and now this one. When we introduce those, we always employ a third party to help us do the market research, to find where is the elasticity, what's going to bring in maximum compliance, maximum remittance for the least amount of expenditure on our part. And every time they have come back to us with a rate, they always say, every consultant, whether it's KPMG, once it was Hemson, they always say the same thing. Find a rate that brings in enough compliance, keeps you in the market that you want to be in, but also is a rate that you could stick with for a good 5 years. Because if you introduce a new tax and then you proceed to raise it the very next year, again, compliance falls off and you've got a whole bunch of new worries. And so all of that research went into this magic rate of 4%. And so I would say that while Councillor Davis has moved a motion that's really about making sure that the collectors of the tax are accountable, she shared it with staff, she shared it with the mayor, we're all fine with that. If you want to be concerned about something,
thank you, Councillor.
Keep an eye on monitoring the STR coming from every carrier, not just Airbnb.
Thank you. Before we go to the mayor, are there any other speakers? No? Okay, Councillor Holyday, you just want to make an announcement.
I had a very, very quick point of privilege. I wanted to recognize a special guest in the council chamber. I want to welcome Alex Silva. Alex is here with his mum, Barbara Gray. Alex is from the Etobicoke School of the Arts, and I think you wrote your exam today in science. We know you did very well, I'm sure. And I want to commend Alex for coming down to watch Democracy in Action and making it through all the evolvings of the evening.
Mayor Tory to speak.
Well, Madam Speaker, I won't take long. I just want to really speak up at the end of this to say that I think this is a huge step forward for us. This is the end of a very long journey that may well have been discussed before my time here. But certainly in my own case, I started discussing this with the Premier early when I got here, because I felt that this was a fair way, in a number of respects, to produce some additional revenues for us. And of course, we all know that we need those revenues to build more transit or to do some of the work we need to do on housing and shelters that we discussed earlier today. And I thought it was unfair at the time that some hotels were paying the voluntary levy and not others. That's an unfairness that existed between and among hotels. I thought it was, it gave us the opportunity to do what we are now doing with this, which is to create a degree of fairness between the different kinds of accommodation, namely the kind of Airbnb type and, of course, the more standard hotels. And I thought it was actually fair that visitors to the city, as much as we very much welcome their being here and spending the money they do in all kinds of places, that it was fair that they should make a modest contribution directly to the city. You know, over the years, we all know every time we have a festival or a big event, they pump up these stories that say that the following festival, the following sports event brought in $100 million to the city. And we all know we don't get 1 red cent of that. And now we actually will have some skin in that game, and we'll get some of these funds for the very valid purposes, including keeping the city a very livable place to visit. You know, because we spend a lot of money making sure this is an attractive place for people to come and visit. I want you to know I will be supporting, as one voter here, all of Councillor Davis's amendments. I think they're all reasonable. I don't share the same level of concern with respect to the Hotel Association collecting this as a matter of principle or just as a matter of sort of practicality going in. They have been collecting this other levy, but she's proposing we take a look at how they did that and how well they did that, and I think that's fair, because we are going to entrust them, as we entrust many private sector entities, to collect tax for us. I think her her proposal, through you, Madam Speaker, to suggest that before we extend this contract, because I think it goes for 1 year and then we have the option to extend it longer, that we should take a serious look at all this, I think is very fair. And then finally, the one I agree most strongly with is I was astonished. I guess it wasn't the first priority I had to sort of figure out where Tourism Toronto fit in around here. And at the time, we weren't sending them a check. We'd gone from the old days where we sent them a check to the new days where they were collecting this voluntary fee. And in the meantime, I didn't even know who to call, quite frankly, when they were sort of changing slogans and doing all kinds of things that I think have some material effect on the city's decisions about how it sells itself. And so even to this day, I found that the amount of liaison of any meaningful kind that I have as the mayor with them is virtually zilch. So I think we ought to look at that, and all that Councillor Davis again is asking through you, Madam Speaker, is that we look at the governance and figure out how we can make sure we're properly represented, given that we are now collecting and remitting to them $18 million. I would just point out one more thing, which is that we have a lot of talk and a lot of discussion about how our taxes are so much lower than other places and so on. The amount this will bring in to us, net of the amount we send off to Tourism Toronto, will be almost and probably will soon reach the equivalent of 1 point of property taxation. And I think we don't look at things that we have that other places don't have. Other places could now have a hotel tax. Other places don't have a land transfer tax. Other places don't have the burdens we have in terms of the services we're expected to provide. But I think when we talk about how low our taxes are, and I certainly, I don't believe overall that the burden is that much less than in other parts of the GTA, especially given the burdens we face, but I think you have to look at the whole picture. And this adds one more way in which we can provide services to people without raising property taxes, which I don't think in the final analysis are as fair as they might be to the people who pay them, including especially seniors and young people who are on often very fixed housing budgets nowadays when they can buy a house at all. So I think this is a step forward for us, and I will not support Councillor Campbell's amendment, only because I think you just can't go about setting rates on things like this on a kind of willy-nilly basis where you just decide to change the number and pick it out of a hat. I do have the list here of other cities, and there are other cities that charge more. But I think the point made by Mr. Williams earlier, I think it was him, where you have to look at the whole tax picture is the relevant one, and if we choose to change this someday, then we'll choose to change it. But I think this number at 4% was carefully considered in terms of not damaging the hotel business, being a fair kind of levy to put onto our visitors and onto the hotel industry indirectly. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, so if we can put the motions on the screen, please. Okay, we'll do them in order. Councillor Campbell's motion first. Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis, please, and Councillor Perks when you're seated.
The motion does not carry. The vote is 5 to 33.
That's the weirdest vote I've ever seen. Revenue, man. Revenue. I gotta pay for his negligent tunneling study somehow.
Okay, our next motion. Okay, let's not get excited here. We still have a vote. Councillor Pasternak's motion. On favor. Recorded vote.
Councillor McMahon, please. Councillor Carmichael Greb. Councillor Matlow.
The motion carries 33-5.
Okay, our next motion. Recorded vote.
Councillor Matlow, please. Councillor Carmichael Greb. Councillor Shiner. Councillor Wong Tam, please, and thank you.
The motion carries 33-5.
Our next motion.
I'm voting all over the place today. Well, we had a strategy to protect us from raising taxes. It's called the Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund, but somebody's emptied it out.
Councillor Davis's motion. Recorded vote.
Councillor Karygiannis, please. Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Wong Tam. Deputy Mayor Min Wong, please. Councillor Perruzza.
Councillor Fletcher, please. Councillor Holland, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 38 in favor.
Item as amended, recorded vote.
Councillor Layton. Councillor Wong Tam, please.
Councillor Grimes, please. Councillor DiCiano, please. Thank you.
The item as amended carries 36-2.
Now that's a more natural vote.
Do we have any quick releases? Does anybody, Councillor Fillion?
Yes, it's sort of a quick release, and it's a motion we needed to go back to, MM 36.1. So the previous motion was to ask Toronto Hydro to not sell 5800 Yonge Street until certain things were in place. We've been notified by them that they have sold it, so that recommendation makes no sense anymore. So instead, they had promised that if they sold it, that they made a commitment that they would put something in place so that whoever bought it could not just run off to the OMB and you know, try to get higher density. So this is asking the city manager and chief planner to look into whether or not that has in fact happened and report back to us.
Okay.
I'll continue to.
So it's not a quick item, okay? Councillor Carroll. Oh, yes, yes. Councillor Carroll.
Mine's a very quick item, Madam Speaker. I just wanted to say on camera, happy birthday, Martha Carroll. Daddy's in the chamber. We're on our way home. Thank you.
Whose birthday?
My daughter, Martha Carroll, who's waiting at home because both of us were busy all day today.
Okay. Are we sure that there's no other quick items? No other quick items? All right. Members, before we do the confirming bill. I have bad news that the elevator behind me is not working. So you'll have to take those two elevators. So, Councillor Ainslie, you have a motion to introduce the confirming bill.
I do, Madam Speaker, that leave be granted to introduce a bill to confirm to the point of the introduction of this motion the proceedings of Toronto City Council meeting number 36 on January 31st, 2018.
Shall leave be granted to introduce this bill? Recorded vote.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Layton, Councillor Shiner, please. Councillor Grimes, please. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong. Mayor Tory, please.
The motion to introduce the confirming bill carries unanimously, 37 in favor.
Shall this bill be passed and declared as a bylaw? Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, Councillor McMahon, Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor Layton, Councillor Matlow, Councillor Lee, please. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Bailao. Councillor Thompson, thank you.
Councillor Cressy, please.
Councillor Lee, please.
Motion to enact the confirming bill carries unanimously, 37 in favor.
Okay, thank you to the staff. Thank you to members of council. Recess to 9:30 tomorrow. Thank you. Meetings.